Okay, welcome to week 4.
Quarter of the way done with class. Congrats. So we're going to continue this week with some key concepts and then looking into a case study. We do have an exam at the end of this week. In week 2, there was some key terms sheet at the end of the PowerPoint, and I think the sheet was emailed separately. I think it would be a good idea to look over that, and then clearly as well as the study guide. So I want to re-emphasize this idea of command and control. The ideas of optimizing a system of efficiency really fall within this rubric of command and control. Controlling or commanding an aspect of a system to derive an optimum return. Hold a system into a sustainable optimal state. And generally command and control is a management style. It doesn't have to be natural resource management. It could be any type of corporate management, etc. And apparently it's popular with dinosaurs. If you're interested, click that link, and there's an article on dinosaur organizations that use command and control. The book this week talks about Cog World versus Bug World. This was a really good and interesting case. And it really articulates the difference between complicated and complex adaptive systems. Systems can be complicated. Think of a watch, have many connecting parts. However, those parts are connected in a way that the size and behavior of the parts doesn't change over time. Think of cogs, so a direct effect in change of one part affects another part proportionally. Which is different from complex. Complex, there are many parts that interact, but not necessarily connected in a linear, predictable way. And there's variations. Parts respond in different ways as conditions change. There's also feedbacks. There's secondary changes of the initial direct changes. So a change in one part of the system may change another part of the system. That also creates a feedback to another part of the system. Another idea that I've mentioned several times, but we've not really explicitly talked about, is scale. Definition of scale: the extent or resolution of a process where the level of organization a phenomenon or process occurs at. So, for example, a field, a farm, a region, country. You think of spatial scale, such as patches, landscapes, regions, or the world. Jurisdictional scale, local or municipal government, provincial or state government, national, international. You can think of multiple scales of networks, your family network, your kin, the network of society, and then network of the world. And then phenomena can be cross-scale. Cross-scale refers to a study or process that addresses multiple spatial and or temporal scales and focuses explicitly on how those multiple scales interact. So here's a figure you see on the x-axis spatial scale, and on the y-axis temporal scale. Days, years, decades, centuries of temporal scale, and then spatial scale from the local, landscape, national, regional, global. You can see, if you look at the figure with some detail, the way climate systems operate across multiple scales, have cross-scale interactions. The weather, water systems. So that's what cross-scale refers to, working across multiple scales. How a change in one scale can affect a change at another scale. So just to talk about the case study from the reading today, the Goulburn Broken Catchment in Australia. Watersheds are referred to as catchments in Australia, just FYI. So just thinking about, again, the social ecological system. Subsystems are contained of resource units, resource system, governance system, and users. All that creates interactions that leads to outcomes. We'll just kind of walk through this example a little bit. So in the case study, what are the resource units? Let's think about two of them. One is the water, the other is dairy and stone fruit, so agricultural production. The resource system here is the watershed, the Goulburn Broken Watershed, about 300,000 acres, hectares of irrigated plains in the lower catchment, the lower watershed of the broader river system. Users in this case are communities and industry. And then the governance system. Governance system can be looked at in a number of different ways. In part, it's private landowners. But then also an important piece of this governance system is a centralized command and control that in the 1950s constructed the Alden Dam as an attempt to make the water supply, the water resource, more predictable. But those interactions there across the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s of the resource units, the system, the resource system, the governance system, and these users led to a series of interactions. So in the 70s, we see that about 97% of the native vegetation was gone in the catchment. There was rising level of groundwater, the groundwater table, and this ultimately led to a depleted resilience to wet period shocks, which happened in 1973 to 1977, and the outcome of those interactions resulted in 30 to 50% of the stone fruit crop being lost. Now, back to how that led to a change in the governance system. In 1986, the Murray-Darling Basin Commission was created, which was a state-federal partnership with authority over land management and the water resource. What that did is combine the Goulburn Broken catchment into a larger Murray-Darling Basin watershed or river system. So now we're thinking about those cross-scale interactions. Now this one watershed is connected to and part of a larger river system. Of course, it was always connected. Now we're thinking about those connections. And part of what that commission did was limit how much salt could be exported down into the river. And as you'll read, part of that was the farmers, the folks in the Goulburn Broken, could pump out the aquifer, put it into the river. That would lower the water table, but it was also very salty water, so you're transferring salt down into the river system. And so the Murray-Darling Basin Commission essentially started regulating some of those actions. Another part of the governance system is you start to see these community-based private landowner groups emerge. In the 80s and 90s, the program was called Landcare. It's a well-documented and a really interesting system of community-based private landowner stewardship. And then another change to the governance system, you see the integrated catchment management authorities. These authorities were set on community-based decision-making. They kind of grew out of the land care movement, encouraged local engagement, capacity building, or local activity, and connected to institutions at higher levels of geographical scale. So those cross-scale interactions. And really what you're seeing here is what we call a system of adaptive governance. So now within this current system, how do these new interactions lead to new outcomes? And what are some of the current thresholds that we need to think about? One that's noted is a social or economic threshold, that the catchment is focused on a very narrow set of commodities. Maybe an efficient market, but it's not a very resilient market. It's vulnerable to economic shocks and market fluctuations. And ultimately, as the chapter notes, sustainable transformation, so transformation of this system into a more resilient, more sustainable system will depend on how much land is revegetated, the pattern of wet periods, and diversification of economic activity. So some key words there. How do we guide, lead transformation of a system to be more resilient? What are those cross-scale interactions? What does adaptive governance look like? All key concepts. And so again, exam this week. Know the key words. Go through the PowerPoints. Make sure you've done the readings. And I can promise you, you'll do wonderful. Have a great week, and let me know if you have any questions.